Local Decision 2022. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Nelson here on North Metro TV. Well, the countdown to Election Day continues, and Wade Kish is with us now, running for Anoka County Attorney. Wade, thanks for stopping by, and I know it's a busy time for you, but probably an exciting one.
It is busy and exciting. Got it exactly right.
Knocking on doors, meeting and greeting, convincing people you should be Anoka County Attorney. How's that gone?
Good. I think people have been really receptive to our message. It's been about public safety, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, but people are curious to hear about that and learn about what I've got in mind for the future.
How do you stand out from your opponent? What makes you the person that should be in charge of Anoka County as far as being the attorney?
I think three things. First of all is the overall prosecution experience. I think the one function of the county attorney's office that most people are aware of is we're the chief prosecutor for all felonies in Anoka County. I've been a career prosecutor, done nothing other than prosecute felonies for 22 years, 19 of which in Anoka County. So my experience prosecuting significant cases, many homicides, many criminal sexual conduct cases, mostly all violent crime, will serve me well as the county attorney. So I think my overall prosecution experience sets me apart. The second thing is, as I said, 19 of those years is here within Anoka County. So I've spent 19 years getting to know the bench, getting to know law enforcement, getting to know the various players in probation, all the various agencies that we deal with. So I've been building those relationships and building those partnerships for 19 years. I really feel like I can hit the ground running as county attorney on day one. The third thing that sets me apart is the management experience. Starting in 2015, I was essentially the assistant chief of the criminal division being the largest and most kind of public division of the county attorney's office. And for the last going on 3 years, I've been the criminal division chief. And what that means is I supervise 16 prosecutors and 10 support staff in our prosecution of about 2,500 felonies a year. So my management experience will set me apart as well.
We hear these buzzwords or catchphrases like public safety, tough on crime, law and order. What exactly does that mean when you boil it all down?
I think what that means when you boil it down is being tough on crime, first of all, has to start with the idea that you're not just talking the talk. There's so many people, like you've mentioned, in this cycle, both attorneys races and law enforcement races and legislative races, talking about being tough on crime. I've walked the walk. I've personally prosecuted 3,000 to 4,000 felonies and supervised the prosecution of another 15,000. So I've been there. I've done that. Like I said, I've walked the walk. What that means is we're going to take a look at cases. We're going to look at them, from the proper legal perspective, but also in a way to hold offenders accountable. And do that in a way that's fair both to the community and the offenders themselves, and in a way that isn't, far-reaching and really having a huge impact on the taxpayers more than just keeping them safe.
I mean, there's the obvious crimes you want to enforce and prosecute. Are there some that maybe we should rethink as far as what we go after?
I think there's some component to that. Former bosses of mine have always said, the murderers and the crim sex people, those are easy. I mean, those are the people you have to protect public safety and just lock up as long as you can. On the other hand, in the county attorney's office, we only deal with felony prosecutions. So we don't generally see very many. There's a handful from the northern part of the county that we have a contract for, but we're only dealing with felonies. So we rule out the misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors right away. But there are some felonies I think we need to take a bigger picture look at as far as how hard and what we're going to do with those things. Certainly things such as, lower level drug crimes, things like that, where it's more of a signal of an addiction or a problem or some sort of other failing that we can address through the criminal justice system. Those might be things we can look at. Certainly anything involving public safety, we want to make sure we're holding people accountable. But there are other parts, like you said, we should look at a better way of dealing with those folks.
Yeah, and to spin off what you said about some of the lower level drug stuff, I mean, just a few days ago, President Joe Biden said he's going to stop prosecuting petty marijuana offenses. How do you feel about that?
I don't feel good about that. I mean, I think that you can't have such a broad spectrum policy about how we're going to prosecute these kinds of offenses. I think we have to look at, the nature of the substances, how much they've had, the person's prior criminal history, their prior treatment attempts. There are so many things that need to go into looking at each one of those cases individually, and you have to do that. That a broad policy like that I don't think is effective.
Somebody who's in that situation, would they be better off getting treatment as opposed to possibly getting locked up?
Depending on who they are, yeah. I mean, we have to look at, and I look at drug offenses in two tiers. They're the dealers that are supplying these things to other people and killing them now, especially with the rise in fentanyl. And then there are low-level users who, generally mind to themselves. They use their substances, but they do it at home in a way that doesn't affect public safety. So you can look at those people in different ways and maybe offer treatment in one component as opposed to incarceration on the other hand.
Anoka County has a large footprint land-wise. You got Linwood Township on the north, Columbia Heights to the south, and various demographics in between. It's diverse. How do you make sure that you're working for everybody?
I think everybody wants the same thing generally. They want fairness and they want accountability. So when we look at a particular case and decide, okay, this is someone we need to really go to the mat with and make sure we're keeping them locked up in terms of public safety, I think people want that on serious cases. On the other hand, across the county, and like you said, 440 square miles we've traveled this summer, 11 different parades. People want the fairness not only in the high-level offenders we're going to lock up, but on the lower-level ones too. I mean, everyone could or has or might have a family member who could be looking at a felony at some point. I think they just want to know that their loved one or their family member, their friend is going to be treated fairly. That's what I hear all the time in jury selection. That's the number one question we ask people about prior experience with the justice system is, were they treated fairly? So, and that can apply, like I said, on both ends, on the more punitive end of the scale and the more rehabilitative end of the scale.
When you saw the events in Hennepin County with Mike Freeman, Keith Ellison eventually going after Derek Chauvin, we saw it in Ramsey County with Philando Castile. Those are border counties. If you were in that position, how would you handle that? You're getting global attention.
And this was a personal issue for me. My wife, as we talked about before we started, she took a job she was a victim witness in Anoka County. Took a job in victim witness in Washington County and was there for a very short time when the Kim Potter case landed on Pete Orpet's desk, the now late Pete Orpet, and all the controversy and the protesters that happened. So we had to have some very serious family discussions about whether this role was appropriate for us and our young family. And ultimately, you kind of have to put your blinders onto that sort of thing. I've been in a role where I've had to look at murder cases and criminal sexual conduct cases kind of with those blinders on and only considered what's in front of me and the fairness, the rules of law, and following the rules of law. So that's what I would do in that situation. I do my best to tune out the outside pressure, look at the cases in front of me, as any lawyer should, look at the facts, look at the evidence, and look at what the right thing to do is, and go from there.
So block out the noise, but I'm guessing that wouldn't be easy.
It wouldn't be easy, but having prosecuted as long as I have, it's not an uncommon thing for someone to call on the phone and be upset. We just have to explain things and communicate. I call it being professionally adversarial or professionally able to have I understand that we're going to have to agree to disagree. So in some of those situations, that'll come into play.
Define your exact role if you're the Anoka County Attorney. What is your job?
My job, it's hard to define an exact role because there's so many different things the County Attorney's Office does. I think the general idea is to do two things: to always do the right thing and to always make sure we're trying to make people's lives better. So you steer the ship in that direction. You get the right people in the management roles within the office to steer their respective divisions in those directions and then weigh in on policy implications that come into play.
If you're elected, do you have some bullet points, some priorities when you take office?
One of them has already started. It's what I created. It's called the Intensive Enforcement Protocol. It's no secret to anyone that right now our law enforcement is under attack. People don't have respect for law enforcement. There's talk of defunding the police. That's not a popular notion here in Anoka County. I understand that. But I created this protocol because the assaults on law enforcement officers are going up and the fleeing from police officers is still at an astronomical rate, much higher than it's ever been. So we created this protocol for another level of review on those kinds of cases and a more meaningful communication with law enforcement before we do anything on those cases. So certainly that would continue. Another bullet point thing would continue. I've been talking about it over the course of the summer and the spring. Human trafficking is a bigger issue in Anoka County than people think it is. We don't want to believe it happens here, but it does, and we need to look into that. And I've got that as a bullet point in terms of, increased prosecution protocols and an increase in hopefully getting an investigative protocol on these things. The Sheriff's Office is doing a great job, and I want to partner with them more on this issue.
And you're right. Right now, being in law enforcement isn't the most attractive profession for a lot of people to get into. On the flip side, how would you convince certain communities where there is a mistrust built up over decades and maybe even centuries with police? How do you bridge that gap and get everybody on the same page?
I think the first thing that I would do is to express what is my legitimate belief that law enforcement in this county does a fabulous job. In 19 years, I haven't seen more than a couple different instances. In 19 years and maybe 20,000 cases where I thought, maybe this officer went too far. Maybe this officer didn't do things in the most appropriate way. And we've addressed those situations. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's really infrequent. I think our law enforcement here does a good job with that. So the first thing would do to be to communicate the idea that we really are on the same page. We're all trying to ensure public safety in a way that's respectful to everyone. The other thing I think you need to do as the county attorney is get out there with law enforcement in those community activities and say, we're partnering with you. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your concerns. We've had a couple cases, criminal cases in the last 2 or 3 years where we've invited extensive groups of the community to come in and talk to us about the issues in this particular case. And when they've done that, at least they've had the opportunity to be heard. So I would want to continue that on a county-wide basis. So people would always feel like not only that they felt like they were being heard, but they had a person to talk to.
Is car theft in Anoka County an epidemic, a problem? How would you describe that?
I think it's kind of an epidemic and a problem throughout the state for a number of different reasons. And, it doesn't sound like a big deal when you compare it to, criminal sexual conduct and murder and assault. But when you think about somebody's car being removed from them, that's how they get to work. That's how they get their kids to school. It can be a major inconvenience. Even the catalytic converters. Getting your catalytic converter stolen is a big deal because oftentimes it takes a month or two to replace those. Yeah. So we went out and got a grant last year to get a full-time auto theft prosecutor and specialized resources for law enforcement to be able to look into this a little deeper, take a little longer look at who's stealing cars, when, how, and how we can hold them accountable.
When you talk to people, what are they concerned about?
I think most importantly, they're concerned, and the thing I've heard over and over again is we support our law enforcement, but we don't want to turn into some of our counties to the south. We want to keep this as a place where offenders are held accountable. I think that's people's number one fear that I've been hearing across the board all spring and summer is that we don't turn into some other places that don't need to be mentioned right now. But and I think people are concerned about that. I think the other thing people are concerned about is just maybe the notion not only of being safe from that kind of crime, but then feeling safe from that kind of crime. So they want to know that they can approach their county attorney. They want to know they can approach their law enforcement and have a conversation about the things that matter to them.
Yeah, and I think most viewers would universally agree, hold the bad guy or bad gal accountable. Would that be applicable to if you did have an officer who did something that was way off base? Are they accountable too?
Absolutely, and another unique perspective I have coming into this, I think I'm the only probably candidate in the races across the state. I've handled over 24 officer misconduct cases. I've grand juried some of those cases, I've declined some, and I've charged some. So I think law enforcement needs to be held to the same standards as everybody else. What's important to remember about that, though, is that all criminal cases start with the presumption of innocence, whether you're a law enforcement officer or not. And I think in some places, law enforcement doesn't get the benefit of that presumption of innocence. They should still get that, and then the case gets evaluated like anything else. And if that officer needs to be prosecuted, so be it. I've talked to many officers who don't like the notion that they somehow are above the law. They want to be held to the same standards too.
And circling it back to, tuning out the noise, sometimes the court of public opinion already has their decision made, don't they? And whatever the case, if it's high profile.
Yep.
And so you have to avoid that, don't you?
We have to avoid that. And one of the things that we've kind of been pushing for and trying to work in the background with the County Attorneys Association are some of these rules about the transparency that goes into a potential grand jury decision. When a case gets declined, then it's all public information. When a case has been presented to a grand jury, some of it arguably is not, and we've been trying to increase the transparency on that so people can know exactly what was presented. That'll help a lot.
The Twin Cities has been on that global stage the last few years. I mean, it's really been something that has torn at the fabric of this area. Is law enforcement evolving? What have we learned from George Floyd, for instance, and all the spin-offs from that?
I think law enforcement is evolving. I think they're getting to a position, and for those that weren't already, are getting to the idea that we have to be aware of everything we're doing. We have to be aware that we're always on. People are always watching us. It's a modern era, obviously. Cell phones are on all the time. But even beyond that, we have to be aware of what we're talking about and how we're talking about it and who we're talking to about it. And I think they're starting to evolve in that sense. Not in a cover their tracks kind of a way, but an understanding of, hey, I want to earn the public's trust for those that don't have it, or those who have concerns about that. And I think the vast majority of law enforcement really wants to do that. So I think maybe some of the career folks who've always had the public's trust are now looking at this from the perspective of, there are people I need to earn their trust even though I've been doing this a long time. And I think some of the younger officers are coming up with that idea, that their respect and their trust isn't just automatically given. They might have to earn that. I think that's the biggest shift. It's almost a cultural shift in law enforcement.
Yeah, we live in a viral world, don't we? I mean, one slip up and everybody knows about
Right,
it.
yep.
All right. Anything you want to say to the viewers before we let you go, Wade?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really think that my 19 years in Anoka County, like I said, gives me the opportunity to hit the ground running day one. I'm anxious to keep doing the work I've already been doing as county attorney.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. He's Wade Kish, running for Anoka County Attorney. This is Local Decision 2022.